All right. Well, hello and welcome back to the Sisters Bonded in Action webinar series. I'm Ayana Young, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Throughout this series, we've been delving into many aspects of the current dominant paradigm that we find ourselves in. We've explored the oppressive foundations of this country, the systemic mechanisms that work to divide us, ways in which we can begin to move forward out of the mass psychosis, out of our biases, and break free of our conditioning and decolonize our minds, and how we can engage with one another with integrity within movements of resistance. Yet in order to move forward and actualize the change we thirst for, we must deepen our understanding of the current political framework and examine the more tangible aspects of how we can collectively mobilize. So today we are speaking with Yasmin Christopher and Bre Weider on exerting and expanding our rights. Yasmin is currently a legislative aide to Washington State Senator Pramila Jayapal. As a recent graduate of Seattle University Law, she is also a spring 2014 Legal Extern with the Honorable Justice Mary Yu. During her final months in King County Superior Court, a fall 2013 law clerk with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and summer 2013 policy fellow at the Polaris Project, an organization that takes a comprehensive approach to human trafficking, based in Washington, D.C. She is also currently vice president of the OneAmerica Board, a national delegate for We Belong Together, an organization that advocates for immigration rights as a woman's equality issue, and an international ambassador to the Bangladesh Work Camps Association, an organization that works to foster quality cultural exchange experiences in her native Bangladesh. Yasmin has also lent her voice and personal family history to raise awareness about human trafficking. She was part of a King County Metro Bus public service announcement campaign in 2013 and has traveled the state giving lectures at various colleges on her family's experience and possible public policy improvements on the issue. In addition, Yasmin has donated her time and artwork to various fundraising events through her collaboration with the Refugee Women's Alliance and the International Rescue Commission that work to provide direct services to trafficking survivors here and abroad. She also has co-founded and continues to consult for an aspiring organization, ASHHO, to work on building resilient communities by providing comprehensive trainings to the community, businesses, agencies, and youth on how to recognize and appropriately respond to human trafficking while focusing on prevention and protection. Bre Weider is a Seattle native who grew up volunteering on Election Day with her parents. Bre's upbringing grounded her with a deep belief in social justice and progressive politics. In 2014, Bre graduated from Western Washington University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in political science. Throughout college, Bre held numerous internships and worked for Organizing for America in 2012 as an organizer. Since her graduation, Bre has worked for 3 elected officials, managed 2 campaigns, and has worked as a Planned Parenthood organizer. She also spends her time serving on 2 PAC boards and volunteers at the local Democratic Party. Bre's strengths are in community-based collaboration, data analysis, community organizing, and communications. Bre feels impassioned when she is working for racial equity within structural institutions. When Bre isn't working, she enjoys hiking, cooking, and reading. Wow. Well, ladies, thank you so much for being on the show and so much for this incredible work that you both do for the entirety of this country and the world.
Thank you. And I am humbled by that very long introduction, but I wanted to clarify I was a legislative aide to Senator Jayapal when she was a state senator, but now she is actually a congresswoman, and I've switched over, so I now work as staff counsel. So I work as policy counsel to the Senate Democratic Caucus. So I just didn't want any misinformation. I was like, I'm very flattered by that intro. yeah. Actually, that's where Bre and I met, was we're working. Senator Jayapal was here on the state, in the state Senate before she moved on to Congress.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for that clarification. That's really important. And both of you have such a deep understanding. And I think it's safe to say that a large portion of the American public doesn't have that understanding and is disconnected from or delusioned by politics. And, I mean, the inner workings of our government aren't exactly the most transparent or easy to understand for people, which leaves many people out of touch with their basic rights as citizens and without a firm grasp on how our democracy works. It may seem simple, but I would love if we could just start off by laying down some groundwork for basic understandings of American politics, government, and democracy. So I'm wondering if you could take us through the levels of power from local government up towards Congress and the White House, and shed some light on how we can start to educate ourselves about our rights as U.S. citizens.
Yeah. Do you want me to start, Bre? Would you like?
Yeah, go ahead, take it away.
Well, so I've worked mostly in state government. That's what I've come out of. Although the organizations that I serve on the board for are Seattle-based and also statewide, but are located and mostly based in Seattle. I think what I've found is that a lot of the everyday issues, like the everyday interactions and things that we see in front of us, are definitely more local government, which I think a lot of people don't realize. I think the sort of national political congressional piece of it is sort of the sensationalized piece. Not that that isn't like very important work and very important decisions, but I think sometimes there's not this understanding of where people can go and for what problem. And that's a really significant issue. I mean, we used to get calls in all the time, and there are members that I talk to now that get calls in all the time, confusing them for congressional representatives.
Yes.
But I would say that calling your state and your local representatives is really how you're going to get things like the pothole on your street fixed, how you're going to be able to advocate for how much money goes into, building out bigger classrooms, how much money is going to go into transportation infrastructure. So I think that disconnect is really disappointing. I think it's also intentional. I think it's a very complicated process, and frankly, it really doesn't need to be that complicated. And I think that one of the things that, when Bre and I worked together was really just trying to, how we talked a lot about, like, how do we simplify this? How do we be able to just message to folks that this connection is here, that you're able to make it? And I don't know that I have the answer to that, but I would say that one of the things I always tell folks that are like, just, oh, I don't know much about politics, but here's my opinion, is it's really great now that especially when we have things like the internet at our fingertips, to be able to look up who your local representatives are, because that's really where a lot of that work is going to get done. You can have all the opinions you want about the national level, but most of the day-to-day things, particularly for communities of color and for low-income communities, are because of that lack of local representation and that lack of access to local representatives. So I don't know if that fully answers what you're getting at, but that to me is kind of what I would say about the structures in terms of, who to contact people.
Yeah, and I just want to reemphasize Yasmin's point. It's really important to understand that the systems of government and the structure behind it is intentionally set up to confuse and mislead people. These institutions weren't built for people that look like me. They weren't built for people like Yasmin, and they're set in place to make sure that we keep the norm that we're seeing right now. And much like what Yasmin was saying too, people think about the government, they see the president, they see Congress, they see the Supreme Court, but they don't. If you ask somebody, if I was to go down and talk to all of my neighbors, statistics show that 8 out of 10 of them probably don't know who represents them at the state legislature. So we have the state legislature on the state level, but even lower than that, it's not lower to me, but because it influences your life a lot more. There's the local level, you have your mayor, you have your city council, you have your school board. People don't think about school boards. People don't think about auditors. gosh, even a lot of this stuff. So Yasmin does a lot of water policy, and I remember she was talking to me about different boards that control the different water systems in the state. And, you know, even as somebody who has studied policy, I have a degree in political science, I didn't know very much about it. So there's very much different levels to it. So for people that want to get engaged, the first thing I say is find out what your passions are. There's really a political avenue for whatever it is. So if you're passionate about education, look at your local school board, look at your local PTA. Starting at like honing in at the very, very local level is how you build. I think of it as like a triangle. And at the very top is the White House. And on the very bottom is like your PTAs or school boards. But once you get into the very bottom rung, you are able to work your way up to the highest office. So I hope that answers a little bit as well.
Yeah, it does answer it. And, you know, it's interesting. I was recently reading a study from 2014 conducted by professors at Princeton and Northwestern, in which the data from almost 2,000 policy initiatives between 1981 and 2002 was compared to expressed opinions from the United States public. The study argued that today America functions as more of an oligarchy rather than a true democracy, in which economic elites and corporate interests wield much more power over governmental policy than mass-based interest groups or the average citizen. So whether people acknowledge the term oligarchy or not, widespread disenchantment and a lack of engagement in the political process seems heavily influenced by the notion that we are powerless, and that no matter what we do, big government is going to carry on, disregarding the general well-being of the people, the environment, you know, etc. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, and also what power do we actually have as U.S. citizens? You know, what are some key ways in which we can begin exerting our power and meaningfully engage in the political process?
Well, I think right now, as you see a lot of the things that are going on, I think it's important to point out that we do have a ton of power and privilege being United States citizens.
Yes.
You're seeing what the impact is on those folks that don't have citizenship, to fall back on, and that they are being targeted and are extremely vulnerable to a lot of the policies that are passed. I've done a lot of advocating in the immigration or the immigrant rights arena. And normally, it's a decision that everyone makes for themselves. And for the first time, it's like out of just how much control public policy can have on folks that don't have that citizenship. It sort of has reflected back on me on how much power I do have as a citizen. I think one of the things that's really difficult and is that government seems like it's this group that's kind of its own, like everybody knows that, and frankly it is. I mean, if you look at here at the state legislature, Bre can talk about her internship opportunity, but when I started here, I realized that a lot of the folks that had sort of moved up through the channels are because they were exposed to state government in some way. Somebody knew about it, someone told them about an internship, maybe they had a counselor, maybe they were a page, and maybe, and a lot of the pages and interns, like, they learned about it because they had the access to people that knew how state government worked. A lot of people don't have that at all, and that's really unfortunate. And so it ends up being this sort of, cyclical thing. People hire who they know, and those people bring in who they know. And so it sort of builds on top of each other. And I can completely understand how it feels to somebody that is not able to get into that process. I have a lot of people that are like, how do I get into that? I have no idea. And my journey here, I got into it because I had no idea. I had just graduated from law school. I knew, a mentor of mine was running for state government. I had no idea. I actually had to Google what a legislative aide was. I looked her up and I was like, and there's nothing, by the way, on Google that talks about what a legislative aide was. So I put research. I was like, God, Google has everything except that. So because my whole thing was I want to do public policy work. And when I started, people were like, why would you start as a legislative aide? You have a law degree. Like, why would you go into straight into a staff counsel or a policy counsel position? And I was like, I don't even know what that is. I just want to get in there so I can see what is available to me. Like, I don't care if I, to me, I was supporting somebody that I really believed in, and I was getting the exposure. Yeah, I was taking less money. Yeah, maybe people feel like a lot of LAs don't need a law degree, but that's something I was willing to sacrifice because I knew that I would not get that type of exposure in any other way. This was my opportunity to be in. So I can completely understand the sentiment. And in some ways, I still feel like that a lot. Bre knows, well, now I'm not, Bre, by the way, the only woman of color in the Senate Democratic Caucus. We have now hired a new full-time communications person who's also a woman of color. But, there's this really isolating feeling that I think we should actually talk about. And one of the things that Bre and I have done together is be part of a mentorship program that is focused specifically on recruiting and supporting and retaining people of color and just people that, that come from disenfranchised communities, to be able to build those support groups and to be able to talk about those things. So that's kind of like what I've tried to do. And we've even tried to do that through the PAGE program. We reached out, Senator Jayapal had a thing where she was like, I want to reach out to the schools that don't necessarily have pages represented in the legislature. How do we, what do we need to do to bring that? Because that's the spark, right? And then all of a sudden you see people that look like you, and you're around people that look like you, or think the way you do, or perspectives that you may have, whatever that looks like, just those diverse experiences. And you're like, oh, maybe this is a space where I can continue to grow, and maybe this is something I can see myself in. So that's what kind of motivates me all the time, even though it's lonely a lot. It doesn't, it's nowhere near, just because Bre and I have worked in state government, don't let that be all of a sudden a reflection of what state government looks like, right? Because it's not.
It's not.
So that would be what I would say about that. I would say that people need to be affirmed in their belief that, that this is a really closed off system for the most part. I don't know that people around here are intentional about doing that, but it's just the same with, it's an elitist structure. And so I think opening it up and making people feel like they belong in it, because frankly, they do. Most of the communities that are not represented here are the ones that are have the highest disproportional impact by the policies that are passed. So I would argue that, those very same folks that feel like government doesn't work for or look like them are exactly the type of people that we actually need in government.
100%. Just kind of piggybacking off of what Yasmin said, I think it's really important to find your voice, know your strengths, and hold on to your beliefs 100%. For me, when I was a legislative assistant in Washington State, working at the legislature, I was the only Black legislative assistant in the entire state of Washington. Out of 149 legislative assistants, session aides, and interns, I was the only Black legislative assistant. Let that sink in for a second. So, kind of like what Yasmin was saying, the groups that are often there, often feel like they have no voice, are the people that really need to be at the table. And there is a lot of times where I felt powerless. It's very isolating, feeling like you are the one person that's there, feeling like you have to stand up constantly for your beliefs. But for me, I know that I come from a place of privilege where I even have the privilege to be there, that I have the education, that I have the knowledge, that I can walk the walk and talk the talk, and though I have to stand in within my own truth and speak up for what I know is right. But it's very much an old boys club still to this day, on both sides of the aisle, on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. It's very much people get hand selected to run for office by the Democratic Party in the state. They will approach you after they do a lot of background research on you, and they'll approach you and they'll ask you to run. And for your legislative assistant, it's usually like your campaign manager. And who's your campaign manager? When I was doing OFA in 2012, there was 3 Black organizers in the entire state of Washington working on President Obama's campaign. It's very much an insider's game. A lot of people who come from generations of political families, their parents are legislators, their parents are judges, their parents are lobbyists or policy analysts. And so they kind of are already built into that network. Where for me, I came into it on the first day. I had an internship. How I got my start was I got an internship at the Washington State Legislature when I was a senior in college. And I came in on the first day. I sat down, I looked around in the room, I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and I went home to my room that I was renting in Olympia, and I went home and I cried. Because I sat there, and I've told Yasmin this story, I sat there and I was just like, what am I doing here? I am a Black woman who is very outspoken, very progressive, from South Seattle. Like, what are these people? Why am I here? But it's just understanding your own power and your own truth, and kind of going back to your point, Ayana, about money in politics. You know, Citizens United, to me, it was one of the most detrimental decisions that has ever happened in recent history. It is absolutely has just broken the floodgates open. And you're right, it costs an absurd amount of money to run for office. People ask me and Yasmin, I know we talk about this all the time. People ask us, like, when are you guys running for office? I'm like, I don't have the money to run for office.
You don't come from money?
I don't come from money. I don't have the money to run for office. I can't leave my job to campaign full time. I've leave my job to become a legislator making $32,000 a year. It's something that only right now you have to have money to do it. And that's just on the state level. We have a race in Washington State right now. And I work for a political advocacy organization, and we do a lot of the independent expenditure work. And even on the independent expenditure side, we're looking at $4.5 million for a state Senate race. That is insane. So,
sorry, Bre.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to piggyback off that piece of it, is that, you know, some of it too is like this idea and comfort around money and
Yes.
around like asking for folks, like that is not, if you come from a place of scarcity, if you come from a community that is not, you know, that is lower income, you have, how do you overcome that? Because what Bre said, like people ask, when are you running? And it's like, well, I don't have money, but also why we're not really investing in how to show people how to ask for money.
Yes.
Like where is that where I feel like I should be able to, and who would I ask?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, am I going to ask the people I know in my life that are close to me, because they're struggling too? That's ridiculous. There would be no way that the folks around me would be able to contribute to a campaign. So, you know, those are the real obstacles that like prevent, you know, folks from reaching that. You hear so many people, especially, you know, in progressive Seattle, that are like, we need women of color to run, we need younger people to run, but really you can't do that. It's an impossible task. It sounds really good, but unless you're willing to put in the support and think about what needs to happen over a long-term basis, and you're committed to making that happen, it continues to be lip service. So I think that's where, you know, a lot of frustration lies. And I think there are folks that really want to do the right thing. And, you know, I think there are folks that feel like, you know, they are doing the right thing, but it doesn't always, you know, there's this thing that happens when people think that they kind of know better than what your experience has actually shown you. And so that's also condescending too. And that's a huge problem in like the political arena, is like, yeah. So that would be my addition to my 2 cents. But yeah, just to reiterate, if anybody's listening to this, I would just say, if the thought is there and you want to do it, you should, like, we need it.
Do it.
No, I don't want to disincentivize like folks. You know, there's some camps that are like, well, you know, what's the point? Like, politics is corrupt, like and it's like, well, yeah, but that's where the decisions are made. Like, that's where things, like, I watch, you know, working on a budget committee, and I watch how things happen and who gets money and who doesn't get money, and a lot of that is because of who's in the conversation and who isn't. So, you know, it's so hard, because you want to say, yeah, you know, you're right, there are all these like systemic problems, but yeah, like we need to, it's really frustrating. You're like, but yeah, we need you there, but I understand too how you feel, and sometimes I enjoy what I do, but there are definitely moments where I've got to shut the door and like sort of, you know, make my woosah moment and be like, all right, let me remind myself why it's worth it.
Yeah, you know, for me too, I grew up, this just always stays with me. My dad always told me, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And for me, I am always going to fight and make my career out of politics, because I know my community has always been on the menu and we're never at the table.
Yep.
And you know, you have to make a lot of sacrifices. But at the end of the day, if this is what you want to do, I encourage whoever is interested to run for office to do it. Because if nothing else, you know, there are little children out there, I'm gonna get a little sentimental, that are gonna be watching, and that means a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know what it would have meant to me to see like a young Black woman to run for office when I was a child. That would have been incredible, because it's just you don't see it. You know, you think of politics as something that is only for white men. It was built for white men, and if you are not a white man, you don't think that you can achieve that. But I really think that we're at a moment right now where people can organize and decide that we've had enough of what has been going on, and really support candidates that are trying to make real progressive change.
And I would just put, and this really is my final comment, but I would say that there's two camps, right? So there's like, because I've chosen one that's a little bit different than Bre. Like Bre, you know, bless her, she's like, I want to run for office someday. Like, this is what I want to do. And I'm like, I respect you so much. I'm like, I personally have found it like policy council and staff council and being that role in the room as opposed to the actual, like the legislator. You know, I found that to be the sort of my piece of presence. So I would say definitely what Bre said about running for office. I would just say that my plug is, you know, you don't necessarily have to run for office. You can also be support staff. You can, because, you know, staff, we do a lot of work. Like, it's thankless for the most part, but you see what gets done. Like, you
staff does the real work.
But you get to see it. You get to see that, and you're like, oh, if someone asks you a question about a certain policy, and you're able to provide them the information that could, you know, help that decision. You can't, you know, move a legislator in one direction or the other, but like the way you present information can have a big impact. So I'd say there are two forms of leadership in government, and I think that people should really look at which one of those, you know, would best suit what they're trying to do if they want to get involved.
Well, thank you both so much for helping us understand the challenges, especially being a woman and a woman of color in the government, trying to run for office, the corruption of money, and that you have to basically have access to wealth to run at all. And then who gets to be at the table? The people with the privilege of the money. And then, like you were saying, then the people who are marginalized don't get a seat at the table, and their voices aren't heard, and their needs aren't met. So what I'm hearing is, in order to actualize change within the current political framework, we must elect officials that truly represent us.
Yes.
And, you know, ones that embody the diversity of our commitments and are willing to amplify our voices within higher levels of power. And so, you know, as we've been talking and I was listening to you, I'm wondering, how can we support people of color, Indigenous women, Indigenous leaders, women, LGBTQIA individuals, etc.? You know, how do we support them to seek and obtain positions of leadership and power?
So Bre and I kind of come at this at different angles. So I also serve on a C4 board. I've served on the OneAmerica C3 and the C4 board. The C4 board is the political arm that looks on specifically recruiting and retaining. Well, we work on like issue campaigns and things like that as well. But looking at recruiting and retaining, particularly immigrant folks, but women of color, and I. You know, it's a hard question to answer, but I think the first thing just comes with asking the question. Mm-hmm. Like, I think a lot of times people don't have it in their mind. Like, we are so socialized to think about what leadership looks like. But I met a number of like just phenomenal women. I mean, God, if we're going to just go down to it, like immigrant women and women of color, like when you look in communities, like they're leading all the things. They're leading their families, they're leading their communities, like they're juggling 1,000 things at once. If we're, you know, foolish enough to think that those leadership qualities can't translate, you know, I think that's part of the problem. So I would say being able to envision, like, who do you see in your life? Like when you look around, who are the powerful people that you see that could do a great job? Open your mind to that and then ask, have you ever thought about it? Would it be, you know, what would you need to do that? And I think that's what a lot of the organizations, a lot of the we can only speak to the Democratic organizations mostly because that's what we know. But I think that's where they can really expand that scope when she talks about people reaching out and thinking about what leadership actually entails. And, you know, I would say that there are efforts to do that, but that's the piece of it, I think, is like being able to open our minds and be like, oh, that's what leadership looks like. Have you ever considered it? Because 9 times out of 10, that person hasn't. Mm-hmm. Nobody's ever brought it up to them. Whereas I don't know what the exact number is, but they say like it takes like 2 or 3 times for a man to ask a man to run for office. Yeah, and 3 at, what is it?
10 for women.
10 for women, yeah. And then you add on whatever that, you know, number is for women of color, or, you know, queer folks. It's like you have, there's this idea where you have, for me, it's like you plant the seed, like take the risk, plant the seed. If someone decides that it's not there for them, then you did it. And maybe the next time someone comes around and asks, then that's that second time, that third time, however many times it takes. So that's for me what I try to do personally. I live by the motto that you're not doing it right if you're not taking others with you.
100%.
I really do. And I live by that 100%. And I'm like, you know, what is the point of me being the only anything?
Yes.
What's the point? Like, yay, there's like a person of color in the room. They're in the conversation. It's like, yeah, but where are the rest of them? Mm-hmm. Where are the queer folks in the room? Where are the, you know, where it's so that's what I try to practice. I wish I had more concrete answers, but I do hope that a lot of these organizations that are talking the talk about recruitment are actually doing that, or actually expanding their minds beyond what they're shown and taught about what leadership actually looks like.
Yes. Yeah, just kind of echoing off of that, I really think it seems like your question is really asking how white allies, especially right now, support marginalized communities. And there's different approaches to it, but I think a lot of it is asking what is needed in the community, supporting those who within those communities that want to take a leadership role, knowing when to step back and listen, and gain knowledge, but also taking, to me, walking the walk and talking the talk for somebody that wants to be considered a white ally too, is also having these conversations with your white family, friends, organizations, work, wherever, any kind of like political sphere. Because a lot of what I've seen in the past that has been frustrating for me personally is I see a lot of people that say that they really want to support women of color, support marginalized communities, support people that are the LGBTQIA community. They support it within those echo chambers, but they're not willing to take the risk that comes along with supporting people in the wider public, right? And that is a risk. We don't want to, you know, we can say that it's not, but at the end of the day, like, we know that coming out and openly supporting like a trans woman of color running for office is a political risk for somebody to take. And we need people, if you really want to stand your truth and say that you're an ally to somebody, you need to be an ally 24/7, not just when it's convenient for you, not just when it's politically viable for you. You need to take a risk because that person is taking a risk by putting themselves out there in the first place. So that's my 2 cents that I would add to that.
You know, the thing that it makes me think of too, because I'm in sort of this like space, right, where most of the leadership is kind of this elite, is the elitist group that we're talking about. I think what I've seen and what sometimes happen is that the tokenizing of certain legislators of colors also by like white progressive communities and kind of is also problematic. Like, I think the idea that someone has done everything right according to you, because they have a different skin color or because they have something else, you get to check a box, but you're not actually, you know, really pushing for some of these changes. And you'll notice that happens where in other spaces, I think, you know, you'll see there are white male legislators that really care.
Yes.
There are. I would say that part of it is like the lack of understanding. That's where I try to come from it from. Have you thought about it from this perspective? Have you considered this, which is sort of, you know, and I think, but oftentimes those, I just see those conflicts happening all the time. Like, how do we support folks that are walking the walk? Like, no matter what they look like or what community they've come from, at the same time, I see all these things like happening at the same time. So they're not like one in front of the other. My mind is very much like fitting together. It's a aggressive place in my mind sometimes. But you know, you see, how do you support these folks that can get there and leave them there? How do you simultaneously support folks from like actually from the community that represent the interests of the community that may not look and behave like the people of color that become tokenized, that really are the ones that make, you know, white communities feel comfortable with them and keep them in power? Because then you also hear these things like, oh, well, you know, we have a Black legislator, we have a Native, you know, and it's like, those are not the comments that you should be making. If you're doing it right, you don't need to make those comments. That diversity is already going to be flowing. So those are the things I get frustrated. I'm just like, all of these things got to work together, which make it really hard because, but that's, I've just seen that. I've seen like a lot of, you know, folks that claim to be white allies that will be very supportive of somebody that just falls right into the trap of like the institutional, done everything the way you're supposed to do it, as opposed to representative of the community. And frankly, if you asked communities, they may point out. So that goes back to Bre's thing about listening. You know, you don't just get to like pick a person that looks like a community and then all of a sudden you have true representation. Like, we don't want to do that either. That's a dangerous trap to fall into.
Exactly, you know, and just the tokenism, I think, is very real, and it always comes from, to me, a lot of times these conversations come out of good places. I've definitely felt like I've been tokenized in the workplace by just being a Black woman in politics. And, you know, for me, it's just talking about the fact that that's an unfair burden to put on me. I do not represent my entire community, the same way that you do not represent your entire community. I am African American. I don't represent the East African community that's in Seattle. I don't know what their experience is. So I can't speak to that just because we share the same skin color. And so a lot of times it's like diversity, people think about diversity as just something as skin tone, right? But we also need within the Democratic Party, within the progressive movement, diversity of thought. Because a lot of like what Yasmin is saying is that it comes down to people who fit the box of what it means to be a quote unquote establishment Democrat as a person of color are usually the ones that are elevated to the point where they're able to run for office with backing from the party. And if you're not that, you're labeled as a radical. And with that label, you don't get a lot of support. So I think it's just a lot of going back to the risk, right? It's all about being willing to asking yourself, are you really willing to risk? What are you willing to risk? Are you willing to have that uncomfortable conversation if you go out and, you know, you go become like a campaign manager for somebody who's running for office, or you volunteer and your family member sees that, if your boss sees that, if somebody within your own political group sees that and questions you about that, are you really willing to have that conversation and have the risk that goes along with that? And if you're not, you have to question yourself and then question what your intentions are.
Well, thank you both for diving into that topic. And I was starting to wonder, let's say we are able to get somebody in office that has an incredible platform, who's really speaking truth and representing disenfranchised communities, or really communities that just want to protect the earth and social justice and all the things that keep the world moving harmoniously. What I'm wondering is, how can we continue to hold elected officials accountable once they take office, you know, particularly in the context of a political framework that is largely against them?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of that is that knowledge piece that I referenced earlier about knowing who to call if you have an issue, because guaranteed, like, some people are like, oh, well, you know, I just left a message or I sent an email and it doesn't matter. Well, when you get like 250 emails on an issue as a legislator, as a legislator, as opposed to like 25, that matters. That's significant. Legislators know when constituents are calling them and emailing them. There's definitely a bigger impact in numbers, because that's, you know, it's a self-interested process, right? Like, okay, this many constituents, yeah, it's the right thing. But when the reality of being an elected official is the elected part. So they respond to constituents, and it's the response to constituents that reach out that are the most powerful. And so what ends up happening, you notice, is that people that are more in the know and people that are more engaged and, you know, tend to be more affluent or tend to have some of these privileges of, you know, knowing how to engage, their issues get moved to the forefront. And I don't think it's necessarily because the legislators are, you know, intentionally trying to make bad policy or support bad policy. I think it's like, well, this is what my voter base is telling me. This is what my base is telling me. And I think when you rock that boat and you're able to organize, I mean, Bre mentioned it earlier, like now is the time where so many folks are like, what can I do? What can I do? You know, and I think it's a great time, especially to have this conversation. I'm so excited when you like reached out about it, because it's like, yeah, it's not going to be the sexiest answer. It's really not, but it's going to be like the moment that you take to look up an issue. If you see like a sign out there and it says something, or you're like, oh, what does that initiative mean? You know, we have pocket computers. They're called phone, you know, there's called phones. There really are pocket computers. You can look that stuff up. You know, you can look on the legislative website and find your district. It's got to find my district. It'll tell you who you're, you know, all of that stuff is available. I think it's just making people aware it's available, because we generally all have the tools to find it. It's not as secret. It's only that it's like the connection is secret, right? Like people don't know that they can like reach out to legislators, but finding the legislators once you know that is pretty easy. So that's really what I would say. Like, if you have an opinion, you have different avenues for that. You can post on social media, you can, you know, do all these other things, like, but the most powerful thing to me is having legislators hear from people that are upset about an issue or really support an issue. And it's really that simple for the most part, but maybe Bre has some additions to.
Yeah, I mean, no, I agree. Just coming from the background of working for elected officials too, I think that reaching out, you know, going back to what Yasmin was saying about staff, some of the best conversations I had that I brought forward, I used to work for the Speaker of the House. And this is like a perfect example to me, was in Washington State, we have been battling a horrible bill that's been put forth, and now it's going through the initiative process around bathroom access. So I had been corresponding with a woman in the district, and her daughter is trans. And so I actually set up a meeting for her to come in and meet with the speaker and myself, and we had an 1.5 hour long conversation. He really had no idea. I mean, he knew, but you know, it's different when you have that like face-to-face connection. And all of that happened because she reached out to me. So knowing who the staff is too, and all that information is public too, and people don't even think about that. You know, legislative assistants, especially on the state level, they work very, very, very closely with their bosses. The members oftentimes will default to their LAs about who they should meet with, who the priority is. And so reaching out to them, we've been seeing on the bigger level too, you know, there's been a lot of news lately about recess that's going on in Congress and all these town halls that are happening, and people coming in and talking about the Affordable Care Act. You know, that changed the vote for a lot of Republicans that were going to vote yes for it. That winded up it didn't pass because those people went home. They had to deal with their constituents being like, what are you doing? We do not want this. And at the end of the day, they are accountable to us. Go to town halls, write op-eds, talk to your legislative assistants for your member, reach out to your members. You know, there's a lot of times people think that the only time that you can connect with elected officials too is when they're at the Capitol. And most of the work gets done during interim, honestly. And a lot of people don't know that. There's a lot of legislators have days where they meet with their constituents. They'll go to a coffee shop all day. Their legislative assistant will set it up, and they will be there all day meeting with constituents. But like Yasmin was saying, it's an education piece. You have to be in the know. I know this because I worked at the Capitol. I had no idea that anything like this even happened before that. So just going out and even just doing the introduction, the small introduction, you know, saying your name, that you're a constituent, talking about issues that are important to you. We talk a lot about corruption and the things that are wrong in government. at the end of the day, I honestly and truly believe that most people that are there, they care in one way or the other. I may not agree with what they care about, and that's a whole different conversation, but they care and they're passionate. And so I always did everything I could, and I know Yasmin did too, to make sure that our constituents felt like their voice was heard. Because at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, that's why people are there.
Yeah.
Wow. It's really interesting just to see how these things, the inner workings, and how you keep saying that education is really this missing link, that it's not that it's secretive, it's not that it's necessarily hidden, all of these different initiatives or ballots or laws that are being passed. It's that most of the time people aren't educated to even know what's going on. And so the other thing, Yasmin, you had mentioned, is that a lot of people are wondering, what can I do? And especially in response to the Trump presidency, we've seen a new wave of interest in the collective mobilization arising. And while it's really exciting to see, the passion and the eagerness of it all, people coming together, I think it's important to shed some light on the disparity between, the superficial engagement and the tangible action and the, actualizing change. We need to do a lot more than share our opinions on social media or even attend protest. So, kind of getting into the details of what we were talking about earlier, I'm wondering, how can citizens take initiative to pass laws and ordinances on a local level, and how does the process differ dependent on the situation? For example, if I wanted to ban GMOs in my county, or rally for a public park, or work towards keeping a Planned Parenthood open, or things like that, how do we know where to go dependent on what we're trying to do?
So the first thing I want to say is I don't want to overemphasize that, contacting and working with your, elected office is like more important or pitted against things like social media or protesting, because in my opinion, I think movements happen when there's collective action, and all of that can look different depending on, where your passions are and what you're doing. And you need, to quote mine and Bre's old boss, you need organizing on the inside and the outside. So starting there, I think if you're looking for public policy changes, I think there's definitely merit, to showing up somewhere. If it is something that you are against, or you want to make a statement and you want to show up in protest, that's powerful. That's a presence, and that, that deserves honor. I think if you're in a situation where you see an issue where maybe it's a public information sharing issue, you realize that people don't have the right information, that's where social media or some of these other outlets, can be really powerful, because you talked about, it's the access to the education piece that has been very deliberate and intentional for a long time. Even if it isn't now, it's just part of the way that the system operates. And so it's not, so, when you're looking to sort of go then to your question about how would you change a particular policy, or if you wanted a policy to be changed, I think there are movements that are happening all around us that people can engage in. I realized that when a lot of people were kind of like ramping up around all of, the things that were going on, there were a lot of like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? Well, especially in a place like Seattle, there's a lot of organizations. Like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel on anything. Like, there's no reason for all of a sudden, like, maybe there's great reasons for some startups and nonprofits and stuff to pop up, but there's been people in the field doing this work for a really long time. If you're interested in immigration issues, you can literally just, I know I keep going back to the Google thing, but like, you can just put in there immigrant rights, Seattle, Washington. It'll connect you with OneAmerica. It'll connect you with NERP. It'll connect you, with a lot of organizations all the way, maybe it's particularly the Ethiopian community organizations, maybe it's a Filipino community center, anywhere you want to go. So I would say if it's a more general issue, look at what's happening around you, link up to what they're doing, see how you can support those movements. If it's a public policy thing, like Bre was talking about, in the interim, in terms of bills and policy, that stuff is just an idea. It just started as an idea. It started as a conversation, an idea, and someone was like, this is what happened to me. And what could we do to prevent this from happening to someone else? Or this is the experience that I've heard about, or did you know that this is the impact that this is having on, you know, someone in my neighborhood? And all of that, that's it. It's just a spark. Every single bill is because someone brought up an issue and a legislator took notice. So I think, you know, if you look around, maybe you don't know, maybe you fumble around, maybe you call the county office and they're like, oh, this is, you know, not in our purview, you know, contact so-and-so, contact the state, and then you contact the state. So, you know, certain things, it's not that straightforward, like maybe what institution would get you that policy change. But what I'm always just like baffled by the fact that the things that happen around me really just start off with a story that someone heard. That's how they know there's a problem. Is someone told them that there was a problem and they decided they wanted to have a conversation about how to fix it. So there's no reason why we can't present our problems also, you know? So that's what I would say. Just think, what have you experienced? Why do you want to work on it? What exactly is the change that you want to work on? Spark that idea, you know, and support folks that are working on it too. You'd be surprised. I'm always surprised on public policy issues on how many things were going on that I thought about, and I had no idea how many people, like, you know, that things had been worked on for years and years. So, you know.
Yeah. I think it's all about, and I'm looking over, I see there's a comment from Candy too that kind of made me think, tie all this in about the incremental change, and how do we still have like faith in that and faith with everything that's going on. And to me, it's all about like constant pressure. You know, we need the constant pressure. This isn't, we pass a bill, like for example, like, okay, let's say we get automatic voter registration passed in Washington State. Yes, that would be amazing. I would love that. But that's not the end of the story, you know? Like, you need to have that 24/7 constant pressure coming from all different levels, you know? So there's different ways to approach it. There's insider, outsider strategy, a little bit like what Yasmin was talking about. We have the grassroots, which is really the community organizations that are on the ground, that are really out there. They're knocking on people's doors. They're doing community forums. They're doing ballot parties. Then we have the grass tops organizations. Like the organization I work for, we're a grass tops organization. We basically supply funding and help with strategic planning for other organizations. We do lobbying. We have like more of a presence down in Olympia. You have the people that are the straight lobbyists that work for these either grass tops or those grassroots organizations that are then like talking and trying to persuade the public policy officials on whatever issue they're talking about. And to me, it's a cycle, you know? It's like all of those things should interwork with each other and really feed off each other. And we need to make sure, like, I'm going to keep emphasizing constant pressure, because this is something that I've really been trying to talk to my friends and family about too. Is just that a lot of times what I see within our party and our movement is that we have a win, we celebrate the win, but we don't continue the work from that.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is, I feel like, is what we're seeing. It's the effects of that right now. It's just that we are like, okay, you know, we got this passed. This is great. We cannot rely on elected officials to implement the policy the way that we see it. We need to hold them accountable, because at the end of the day, you could be working with an elected official to get this policy passed. They could be out of office next year. Mm-hmm. And you're back to square one. So it's just making sure you have that constant pressure. And like Yasmin was saying, you know, start Googling, figure out what issues, find out. It's better to, like, to me, to always have a small group of things that you're very, very passionate and knowledgeable about than just a whole bunch. It's better to have a little bit and know a lot than a lot and know a little, you know? Focus in, reach out. I've had people reach out to me on LinkedIn that I've never met before a day in my life. And they're like, I really am interested in your work. I'd like to get coffee. And I am more than happy to do that. A lot of people I know are more than happy to do that. That's how I got my job working for Senator Jayapal. She had never met me a day in my life. I emailed her and I said, I think you're amazing. Can I work for you? Here's my resume. She invited me over to her house for coffee and hired me. You know, people get their start like that too. And just, it's really about finding where your passions are, making sure that you connect with the right groups, and making sure that that cycle continues even after the law gets passed.
And, you know, I'm looking at Candy's comment too. I was a space cadet on the comments. I think something that she pointed out is, you know, talking about this incremental change. You know, you hear a lot in government, like things move slowly, like things, this idea like little by little. And, you know, like if you're the type of person that's an advocate or just, you know, a person that is like impacted by things, and little by little is not reassurance. Like, you know, I had a conversation with a guy who, you know, considered himself a progressive. He, you know, he's 60s and 70s. He was out there championing for change. And he's like, look how far we've come. Like, he was kind of pushing back on me as though I was supposed to appreciate how far we came. And I'm like, that's really easy for you to say because you're not in the group that's waiting for the change. If you're, the change can't come fast enough if you're that marginalized group. And so I kind of go through that frustration. I think there's an interesting thing though that government does where I think part of that is reaching out and just having a better understanding. Like right now, things are just so ideological. They're so ideological. So we can say like, oh, things are changing slowly, but it's really because there are people that are resisting the change and there are people for pushing for the change. And that slow incremental thing is just a compromise between these two, like, you know, sort of warring sides, if you will. And so we're told like it's incremental, we need to work together. So I would say on the community level, part of like that whole idea, changing hearts and minds, that notion that you can spread information, like we were talking like, you know, outside of the government realm, spreading information, making sure that people understand issues, revealing things, you know, a lot of the Islamophobia that's going on, my family is Muslim, and a lot of Islamophobia came out on social media. And because I was like, who's like thinking this stuff? Like, where did this stuff come from? And a lot of those folks were people that had come to my home for dinner as a child, that had like been friends with me, that never once asked me what my religion was other than pure curiosity. And here they are just espousing all of these like really dirty things. Now, there were also elected officials that were sort of making judgments and doing things. Frankly, I'm not going to go and start changing their mind. They've probably run on a platform. They probably, you know, are ingrained in whatever that idea is. What I did do is I reached out to some of the folks that I saw doing that. And I just asked the question. I was like, have you ever thought about the fact that you came over for dinner? Did you ever feel threatened in my home? Do you know any other Muslim American people? Like, has that ever occurred to you? And the answer 9 times out of 10 is like, oh, no, I don't. I actually have no idea. And so I see that, you know, yes, it's so frustrating in government about that incremental change. But I think if you're working on social movements on the outside and holding elected officials accountable, I think that's what speeds up the process. And then the other point was about how, you know, when things roll back on the conservative Supreme Court. Now, I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss, but I'll tell you I'm scared shitless about it. Like, that's true. That could really roll back and that was the thing about the elections that I think a lot of people were not knowledgeable on, really, is what that impact of that Supreme Court nomination and what some of these other things like, oh, well, you know, we could survive Trump. He's only going to be there for 4 years, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but the things that in the people he puts in place, those have long-term detrimental consequences. I would say the only thing that we can do, again, is focus on the state and local level, because a lot of the policies and the funding and things that get allocated, those are actually controlled more on the local level. People have a misperception about how much, yes, the Supreme Court makes big, you know, general decisions that impact our lives, but it's still, you know, it's the internal conversations, like for instance, around abortion or, you know, reproductive rights or whatever, reproductive access. The funding for things, a lot of that's on the state level. Like a lot of that is on the state level, like what kind of things we support. So no, I don't have a great answer on why not to be totally scared about what the Supreme Court and what that nomination could do. But I would say that that's even more of a reason to really focus on what's happening locally. And so that would be my response. And, you know, I wish I had something better on that, because I'm freaked out too. But that's why I'm like, sometimes I got to shut like a lot of the national stuff out and be like, all right, I really need to focus on the day to day. We got to focus on the day to day, and that's what keeps me kind of. And same thing about, you know, focus on the people I know, focus on the people I love. Like this idea that the revolution starts at home, I believe that 100%. You know, we've had community, like my sister is she's an openly queer Muslim person, and does a lot of advocacy. And I know I meet a lot of people that are progressive and they're like, oh, well, I can never convince my family. I'm like, look, if we can have a conversation in my family with my, super conservative immigrant mother about, all of, being queer aside, just the tattoos that my sister has, right? Like all of these things, if we can have those conversations like at the dinner table, that's where like things really, really happen. And so and also goes back to Bre's like ally conversation. There's a lot of white folks that are like, well, I can't talk to my brother or sister or whatever, whoever lives in these conservative areas. It's like, well, then who else is going to talk to them? Who else is going to talk to them? Their legislator's not going to listen to you. You're not a constituent. If they're living in a district where, people feel like whatever is wrong or whatever these policy, that's who you actually need to target. That's exactly who you need to target. And I think that's what speeds up the process. We can't wait for the system to change itself. Like that would just be, don't hold your breath on that.
What incredible responses both of you just gave, and the whole time, but thank you so much. And, Yasmin and Bre, I think you both mentioned just, the abortion issues, and, it's profoundly disturbing that still today there are questions surrounding the rights of women to make decisions for their own bodies. And such threats to our sovereignty as women are a glaring component of the Trump administration. Through the reinstatement of the global gag rule, the potential appointment of overturning the appointment of judges, like we've been talking about, of the Supreme Court that would support the overturning of Roe versus Wade, not to mention the insidious ways in which conservative states already target health clinics that provide abortions. So I'm wondering if you could both elucidate some of the concrete fears that we're facing surrounded women's health care today, and guide us through any ways in which we can stand up for these basic rights.
Hey,
oh, go ahead.
Lead on this one. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. For me, this is one of the issues I've been talking a little bit about, finding issues that you're really passionate about. And for me, access to reproductive rights and just reproductive rights in general for women is one of my big passion points. I used to work for Planned Parenthood in their political advocacy branch, Planned Parenthood votes. And I will just say, this is real. I was working at Planned Parenthood when the video scandal broke. So, for us, I still consider myself part of like the Planned Parenthood families, because amazing organization that I loved working for. For us, the Trump administration is a product of something that we have been fighting since Roe. Since Roe passed, we have been fighting against people that want to make sure that we don't have access to that, and that to abortions, to contraceptives, to making sure that insurance companies have to pay for your birth control for women. Well, I just want to point out at the same time, Viagra is covered under health insurance, but for some reason, birth control, it's not going to happen. These are real fears, and with Judge, what is his name? I'm thinking of Merrick Garland for some reason, but it's not his name. Who was just appointed? Yasmin, do you know his name?
I try to forget.
I know. He's conservative. And so there's a really big fear right now that Roe is going to get overturned. And if not even overturned, I don't know if people saw last week, Gorsuch, thank you, Candy.
Yeah, I was going to say Gorsuch, and that's why I was embarrassed to say it. I was like, is that so?
The president, I hate even calling him the president, I call him 45. 45 just enacted a executive order that gives states the power to decide what they do with the federal funding that Planned Parenthood gets. Planned Parenthood doesn't get any federal funding. No federal funding from Planned Parenthood goes towards abortions, but even just the fact that that executive order was signed into law and it's going to give states the power to do that is really terrifying to me. And I think a lot of it is that we, as a country and as a movement, we have decided to not normalize abortion. I am more than willing to share right now I've had an abortion before, and I think it's really powerful and important for women who are abortion advocates, who have had abortions, to really speak our truth and normalize it, that this is a normal medical procedure. And the decision that I make with my own body is something that should be left up to somebody who has a medical degree and not somebody who is in the halls of Congress. So it's really, to me, about having those conversations, because you would be surprised. I was very open, and Yasmin knows this, I was very open with the abortion process that I went through and sharing my story, and the amount of women who came out and told me that they had also had abortions. I'm talking about women within my own family that I had no idea, had never talked about this before in my life. Women within my own family, friends, colleagues, mentors that have told me that they themselves have had abortions, but they are too ashamed, even as somebody who considers themselves an ally and an advocate and pro-choice, I hate that term, but pro-choice, that haven't felt like they could really speak their truth. Is astounding. And I think we really need to like take the narrative back and say, no, this is a normal everyday thing. It's not normal everyday thing, but this is a normal medical procedure. It's a surgery. The same way that if I was going to go have my tonsils removed, that's a surgery. It's really just kind of, to me, changing the narrative around it and not being afraid to really shout your abortion. I love that movement. If you haven't seen it, it's a great, was a hashtag on Twitter a couple years ago, and now there's a whole website with women sharing their stories. But it's just having those open and honest conversations. Support your local Planned Parenthood. I'll tell you right now, we're always looking for volunteers. And I'll put in my little Planned Parenthood pitch right there. Planned Parenthood is always looking for volunteers, and it's really important that if you do decide to volunteer with Planned Parenthood, that you actually go to them and ask them what they need. A lot of times people really feel passionate about doing counter protests against the protesters that are outside, but that's, in my opinion, not, and in Planned Parenthood's opinion, not the best way to go about it, because you're just yelling back at somebody who's yelling at you, and then the actual patient who's going in, they don't know what's going on. They're still confused. A lot of people are still afraid. They don't feel safe. So really, like, going to Planned Parenthood, supporting them, supporting NARAL, any organizations that you know that are really standing up and fighting for abortions rights, now's the time. And letting your elected officials know this is important to you. A lot of these conservatives are like, most of the time they're men. Let's just be honest. A lot of these conservative men think that these are issues that don't affect the communities that they serve, and they're wrong. 100% wrong. So finding folks within those smaller communities, within those marginalized communities, and having them come forward and speak their truth, I think is really powerful, and how we can really combat this. But you know, it's a scary time for all of our friends and allies that are abortion advocates, and we have to support them any way we can. You know, for me, it's, I give money when I can, give money, give time, but just let them know that you're there. These people put their lives on the line. You know, I could tell stories about, just from when I was working at Planned Parenthood, the amount of times people had called in and threatened to bomb where we work. And these are doctors and nurses. Not everybody is on the political side. The political arm of Planned Parenthood is actually the smallest arm. So most of those people are just working their jobs trying to provide people health care. It is a health service. This is not a political issue. This is a health issue. And for some reason, this country, it's much like the environmental issues. Like in other countries, I've had conversations with people, and they're like, these aren't political issues. These are, you know, these are issues that everybody can agree on because it's science. And for us, our country is very much like, we don't talk about the problems beneath the surface. This is America. This is the land of the free. This is the land of the opportunity. We know that's not true. We know that. But we're not willing to have those real, honest conversations and bringing like the ugly truths to the surface, because it makes people feel bad. And until we're really willing to have those conversations, we can't push for change.
And the only thing I would add on that is, a lot of conversations I have with folks, because I have some friends that consider themselves, their faith to be really strong to them. And they maybe have made a comment like, I could never see myself getting an abortion. And, my response is, that's great. Don't get an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be on birth control. Don't get, I think it's an interesting idea, not to further use the pro-choice thing, but to focus on the word choice. I think for me, women, so there's this thing that's happening. There's this like anxiety grab for like this America of yesteryear that looks frankly nothing like the people that are actually growing up in America right now. And I see that, and it's like, we want to hold on to what we think is, this ideal that was like, I don't know, maybe a 10-year period for maybe 10% of the population, like at one, and it's this thing. And I think women's rights get like sort of all twisted in there. And I think sometimes women as ourselves, like sometimes we are like, well, do we take a stand like for or against? And for me, I feel like we should take a stand to make space for one another. Make space for one another. Like if you have an issue, if you need to go in and have a medical procedure done, that is your choice. You have the autonomy to make that decision. And so I try to remove it, to echo what Bre said, I try to remove it out of this political ideology piece. I'm like, I have the right. And while all of these, Trump folks and whatever elected folks that are taking this last grab at things, what I see in the community is amazing, strong women who are coming up, they're primed for leadership. And that's what keeps me confident. I'm like, this is where the conversation is going to go. What you see, the resistance that you see is a resistance to change that's already happening. Yes. And so we're living through that. So how do we focus on this other conversation and guide us, move us all in a similar direction? And I think part of it is like, hey, that's great. You want to bleach your hair? Go for it. Like, it's your hair. I can't remember if it was Cher or Dolly Parton, because I appreciate things about both of them, mostly because they don't friggin' give an F like on a lot of things that people care about. And I just appreciate that in anybody. But it was like, there's an interview and they're like, well, what do you think? What do people think about your plastic surgery or whatever? And it's like, if it's mine. If I want to put tits on my back, it's my back. You know what I mean? And I was like, God, I love that. I've not somebody that ever wanted or felt the need to get breast implants. But if like that is what somebody wants to do with their body, by God, like, why am I going to sit there and like hate on you and judge you for it? And I think society kind of does that to us. Like, we're constantly like, oh, if I choose this and you choose that, and I've got to compare what you have and you got to compare what I have. And I'm like, but it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. I think we can all like really exist together just by supporting whatever our decisions are and being like, that's cool because it's yours. I have control over what I do. And so that's the thing about expanding rights for folks, right? Is like, people always think that if I have more, you have less, or vice versa. It's that mythical fixed pie. Like, if you get a bigger piece, I get a smaller piece. It's like, no, in your brain, you just expand it. There's no, so that's what I would say, like, that I've been trying to do and trying to promote with many of the women in my life. I don't tell them like, oh, you're women of faith, you don't think that you're faith. I had no women of faith that do think that abortion, like they would consider it, or they have had one. And that's okay too. However you want to interpret it is totally fine. Just don't mess with me.
Yeah.
Don't tell me what to do. I won't tell you what to do, and we'll be good.
Well, thanks to both of you, and thank you for the humor on the topic, because I know it's a heavy one. And also, Yasmin, as you were talking, I know that much of your work is within the immigrant communities and as well with the refugees and the human trafficking survivors. And I'm wondering if we could discuss the recent travel ban placed upon people coming from predominantly Muslim countries, and how the current administration is affecting your work, and what are some of the current fears that you're having about witnessing, this scapegoating within such communities?
So I come at it from two angles. So like, one is that really personal piece, where it's like, I come from a family of immigrants, like also like, just having that, like looking at my family and looking at my friends and looking at the people I grew up with and being like, who are they talking about? Like, honestly, like, it wasn't until 9/11 happened that I knew anything about the conversation with violence in Islam. Like, and I was not like, you know, I was somebody that chose to be pretty secular. Like, I'm not a religious person really at all, although I am very proud of the culture of my faith and like what that means. But it was one of those things where I'm like, I don't understand. I've never met anybody that advocated for anything like that. And I grew up with a very diverse group of, you know, Muslim American people. So, and then there's the other piece, which is the, you know, sort of the educational, like, law piece of it. So when I was trying to get into law school, one of my final papers in undergrad was, it was called Colonization, A Legal History of Oppression. And it actually looked at the legal, like, immigration laws that were passed, like the Chinese Exclusion Act and all of those other things that were passed. And I looked at it and was like, wow, like, that's, how could that I had this ignorant belief, even though this was post 9/11, even though this hate had already kind of started, that these are the things, I'm a firm believer that if you know your history, that is really one of the key issues to shaping your future, which is why a lot of communities don't get taught their history, because then, you know, if you don't get taught your history, you're not empowered, et cetera. But you know, it's one of those things where I'm like, I still looked at it as something that could never happen again. It wouldn't happen again because it's illegal. Like, it's unconstitutional. There's things that we espouse as Americans, and I'm going to use we as a collective we, because when we're talking about the Constitution and we're talking about these ideals, religious freedom is one of the ideals that has been at the forefront of conversations. And I look at it and I'm like, so what you're saying is that one religion can have all the power and the freedom to express itself in any way it wants. One religion cannot. And that is fundamentally, like, in opposition to what religious freedom actually is. It doesn't say religious freedom for Christians. It doesn't say Christian freedom. It says religious freedom. So I have these, like, two sort of spaces that I, you know, go kind of jump back and forth, or, you know, when I'm making these arguments. And so I try to think about it depending on what the person or the entity or whoever I'm corresponding with is really going to feel. I wish everybody could feel the human aspect and be like, look, my mom came over here. She never learned to read or write. She was really uneducated. There's probably a number of things that my family falls into stereotypes for. And they're stereotypes for a reason, because our immigrant experience is distinctly unique from a lot of other immigrant communities, you know. But if you're going to go based on sort of these things that people say about immigrant groups, you know, like, we were on social services. But you know what? My mom, her 3 children we've all graduated from college. She's got a lawyer. My brother is about to be a dentist. My sister is an activist. Like, you know, these are really impressive things that kind of go to the heart of what Americans have, or what immigrants have contributed to America. So when all of this stuff started happening, there was first the visceral fear of, like, oh my God, I have family that we still are trying to get into America. I have family that's very recent into America, maybe only 4 or 5 years. What's going to happen? I had a brother who was actually in the Middle East when that executive order was passed down. His father lives in the Middle East. His family lives in the Middle East. He's got a very Middle Eastern name. It's clear, you know. And so I was having kind of all of these panic moments, but I think I just had to regroup for a second and be like, you know what? We should be using the collective we, and we should actually be looking at the fact, it's not, a lot of the folks that are espousing these views and are supporting it will be the first to tell you that they believe in the Constitution. They'll be the first ones to be like, no, America's the greatest because we have the best moral document in the world. And it's like, well, you know what? I'm going to hold you accountable to it. I'm actually going to hold you accountable to it. Because if you believe that this is the moral document that dictates what you do, and I can't convince you of the contributions of me or other people like me, then I'm going to hold you to the standard that you've set. And so that's what I try to focus on. And, you know, whether it's, I think it's only a matter of time until we become majority minority country anyway. So I hope that we can all have those conversations, because we need to have these conversations within our communities as well. So that same thing. So we're working towards what that next wave looks like. But I don't know if that's exactly to your point, but and then part of the reason that I'm, you know, kind of back and forth about it is because it is a really emotional thing for me. It's hard to sort of separate what the actual arguments are when you're just like, you know, I look across at my husband and I'm like, can you believe we were watching a documentary about, like, Japanese internment? And it's like this moment of, like, we don't even know what to say to each other. I was like, do you know that if, like, folks start getting like rounded up, if there's this, you know, even if it's just looking at like legal permanent residents or other folks, I was like, this is, my family's like in the direct line of fire.
Wow.
And that feels, it's really indescribable how that feels. So I kind of have to compartmentalize and be like, all right, well, I'm going to focus on what your argument is, because it's too much for me to continue this conversation when I know that where you're coming from is that I'm less than you anyway.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do from it. I'm happy to dive deeper if I traveled into another arena with my answer. But.
Yeah, I will just add a little bit too. You know, for me, I always think about the fact that, like what Yasmin was saying, this has been done before. This country has a really long and deep history of excluding people that they see as a potential quote unquote threat. But at the end of the day, it's important to realize that every single person in this country, unless you are descendants of enslaved Africans or indigenous, you are here directly because of immigration. Good. In one way or another.
Hi.
And it's really important to
Sorry, security was checking on me. That's
okay. It's really important to remember that, you know, and a lot of people have a really short history. A really short memory of American history. A book that I really recommend for folks to read if you haven't before it's called When the Irish Weren't White. And this really changed a lot of my perspective on like immigration and race too. Because even in, you know, the 1800s, when there was a lot of people were coming to the United States from Italy, from Germany, from Ireland, those people were not considered white and they were not considered citizens. And they're treated a lot of the same way that we're seeing the way that our brothers and sisters from the Middle East are being treated, the way that we're seeing people that are coming up from South America are being treated. Like, this is not a new thing. And a lot of this to me is exactly what Yasmin was saying. You know, a lot of the work that I do right now is a lot of like data analysis of just trends in the United States. And we know for a fact that by the year 2050, people of color will be the majority of people in this country. We even have a name for it. It's called the Rising American Majority. And so what we are seeing right now is a direct backlash against that. That people know that this is their last chance to grab onto whatever little semblance of power they've been able to have and create for themselves in this country, that this is the straw man. They're like, this is my last chance to grab at that. And that's what, this is all a reaction to that. In my personal opinion, I really strongly believe that this is a reaction to that, that people see what is coming down the pipeline and they're afraid. Because for the first time in American history, people are going to have to experience and feel what my community has been going through. And to me, it's like, yeah, it really sucks feeling like you're marginalized, feeling like your voice hasn't been heard, but join the club. I've been feeling like that. My ancestors have been feeling like that since they came off of a boat and stepped onto this land. And we've been fighting for our rights ever since then. And, you know, I didn't come here as an immigrant. My family didn't come here as an immigrant. So this whole like story of like American, quote unquote, American immigration within itself is even flawed, because I'm like, I wasn't an immigrant. I don't have this American dream story. Like, what does that mean for me and my place here? It's a very much like idealized white version of immigration. There are large numbers of immigrants from other communities in Eastern Europe. There's like in Washington State, we have a very, very large like Russian community, but you notice that there's no othering of those folks, and it's because they're white. Like, let's just be 100% honest about it. It's that those people are seen as safe because they're going to quote unquote fall into line into what it means to like be an American. And it's this whole idea of othering. How do we combat against that? It's just like what Yasmin was a lot of saying. It's just like sharing your stories and like really having that connection and that full understanding of that we are all here because somebody in our line of family, unless like I was saying, you're indigenous, you're descendants of slaves, you are here because somebody came here. And I tell folks all the time, my husband is white, and we were just having this conversation when all of this was going on and all of the executive orders. And I looked at Brian's my husband's name, and I was like, does your family have any quote documentation coming here? He's Hungarian. I was like, does your family have any documentation of coming from Hungary? And he's like, no. And that's the honest truth, is that the most of the people don't. If we hold the majority of people to the standards that we're holding people today for becoming an immigrant, like a lot of people would be quote unquote here illegally. I hate that term, but that's like quote unquote here illegally, because like there's different standards for different people.
Mm-hmm.
And we really need to like fully understand that and like come to terms with it, and that those standards have changed throughout the years to really fit what the ideal of an American is. It has changed, and it's continuing to change.
And then, the last remark I would just say is that if it's for folks that are feeling some kind of way, one of the things that really helps me out and sort of helps me out sometimes is focusing on, okay, instead of just letting it all kind of like just bring me down and just have this like sinking feeling, I'm like, I am hearing and listening to the stories of folks that are impacted. So for instance, I'm sitting there being like, oh my gosh, this is so devastating. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm a US citizen. I'm a US citizen. I need to pick myself up. People in my community and people, that are experiencing these direct things, even if they're people in my family, it's not my direct thing. And what I've noticed is that a lot of people are like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so devastated. It's like, what a beautiful part about empowering yourself is supporting other people. And I had friends that I knew were undocumented, and I had family members, and I'm like, all right, pick myself up. What can I do for you? How can I serve you? Like, what do you need? Do you need a plan? Can we, have a phone tree? Can we like do all of these other things? And so I would say in terms of providing some direct action for folks, it's really about like, okay, I feel bad. This is horrible. Now, what am I going to do to make sure that the people who really can't leave their house, not because they're depressed, but because they're actually worried about being picked up by Immigration Customs Enforcement, how can I show up for them? So me as a person, that's what I try to do. And that's what I've tried to do even within my own family. So it's really overwhelming, but I just want to add that in there. And that, as we grow into the majority, I say like a lot of the focus is on us. Like we have to start demanding that our histories get taught, because I think the whole thing about immigration is there's this false idea of who has made contributions to society and who hasn't.
Yes.
And you look at America and you study American history, folks that have been brought here or have come here, or, indigenous folks, we have all made significant contributions to the earth that we stand on. And I think we should be honored in that. And I think when other folks in the majority culture right now learn about those, it changes the whole thing. I think about the education I got in elementary school and who I learned about. And I learned about the Columbus and, all of these other like things where you grow up and you're like, God, that's all bullshit. But like, it's still being taught. Like it's still self-perpetuating. And when you really do, a book for me that stood out was Multicultural America, was a book that I read in college. And that was like, oh my God, like, I mean, we talk about the Chinese building the railroad, but did we talk about like the real sacrifice of their bodies in building that railroad? Did we talk about like, we didn't. We don't put it up there. We just don't elevate those things. So that's something I'd say is like, reach out, like realize what your privilege is and where you can contribute and how you can make other people feel safe. It will help you to feel better. And also like, remember that you contributed. Remember that the people that you're talking to that, you may not identify as looking like you, that they've contributed to. And we contribute every single day by being here and like participating in life. And that's worth honoring. You don't have to be an elected official to be good at life,
Right.
You should try to be a good person mostly. So.
Wow, thank you both so much for being able to speak from a educational and intellectual place, but also an emotional and personal space. Thank you so much for both sharing that with us. And I would like just to, let anybody know from the audience, this is your last chance to make a comment. And as well, I would like to just open the floor up to both of you and say, however you'd like to close out this conversation that we're having, whatever you'd like to end on, I'd just like to give you the torch.
Do you want to go first, Bre?
Yeah, I will say that I know there are days that all of us get very overwhelmed and by what's going on nationally. And, you know, to me, that's by design. Things come out in an order to make people feel overwhelmed, to make us feel like we can't do anything. But we know through history has shown us that organizing combined with getting the right people elected to office, combined with that constant pressure, can make real change. And we have to keep fighting. It's important to take care of yourself too. You know, I have had like conversations with a lot of my friends who just feel bad when they miss out on a rally, or they don't go to some kind of action, and they'll text me and be like, oh, I feel so bad, I couldn't do that. And I'm like, you need to, you know, you can't take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself. So taking care of yourself right now is really important. And also like just education. I just think, you know, one of the worst appointments to me that 45 has done is Betsy DeVos and the havoc she's about to inflict on our educational system. Just making sure that you are honestly aware of what is going on, question everything, just keep fighting, you know, and really stand tall in what you believe in. Don't let people persuade you into feeling like what your truth isn't a reality. Because I've felt that a lot in the past, when people have really pushed back and made me feel like what I believe in isn't real, you know, but it is. Your truth is real to you, and it's important to speak that. So.
Sorry, I saw that there was I thought it might be a question. Well, thanks. Is it, if I pronounced right, Ayana? Wait. Oh, thank you for facilitating. I was like, that sounds familiar. That's who. Yeah, okay. So what would my closing thoughts be? You know, I think that we're in this place right now. Like Bre said, it's really intentional that national politics and things are thrown at us, especially like in this social media world. You know, we really self-select, we sort of perpetuate things. We get, you know, we internalize things, and then we all of a sudden are crippled. Yeah. We just feel crippled. And like, one is, it's okay that you feel that way. Don't be ashamed that you feel crippled. But when you have that moment, I think what a lot of people aren't able to do is then, you know, translate that into like how it is that they can, you know, own their power and also learn how to share that power and uplift other people. So it kind of goes back to what I've already said. But for me, you know, we really should be lifting up folks that, you know, are changing the narrative, that are taking the risks, are putting things out there. You know, when Ayana asked me, like, you know, if there was somebody else that I thought that I might want to be, you know, part of this webinar with, you know, and I immediately thought of Bre. And you know what was beautiful is I had like 10 amazing women that I could have suggested to you. And that to me was a personal success. I was like, oh my God, like this is so awesome. I have a number of folks, and man, if we were to just kind of continue doing that, if we continue to lift each other up, give each other space, allow each other to talk, speak our truths, because a lot of people have this idea that truth is this static thing, just like this, you know, thing called the law is, you know, without emotions and without feelings, and context doesn't matter. And that's just not true. All of it is reality. The way we bring our emotions and the way that we perceive the world, that's our reality. And we should have the space to share that. So this is what I appreciate about this webinar a lot, is the ability, you know, to do just that. Ask my opinion. I was kind of like, I mean, sure. It's like, I don't know. You know, I hope I have something to contribute to this conversation, but if I don't contribute anything else, I just hope that in the spaces that, you know, right now I might be the first, or the spaces where there aren't a lot of people that look or think or whatever like me, or even just differently than me, but different than the status quo, because that's okay too. You know, that I leave folks, that I've uplifted folks in that space, that I don't leave as the only one, so that someone else has to be the only one. So whatever that looks like in your life, I would just say, like, focus on that. 100%. Focus on the every day-to-day interactions. How do you make people feel? Can people reach out to you for a coffee? Have you reached out for a coffee? Like, you know, sometimes just turn off Facebook, like turn off Facebook, turn off Twitter, and go have coffee with your friends. Or like me and Bre did, like go out at karaoke on Saturday night.
That's right.
Yeah, like, yeah, you know, like just go do that. That's okay too. So.
Oh, Ayana, we can't hear you.
I think you're muted.
I am muted. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you both so much for this incredible in-depth conversation that was full of insight and emotion and truth. And I know that the audience has been able to take away so much from this, so much education, and also, you know, that lighting that fire in us. And I really so deeply appreciate it. And I'd love if you could send me links so I can email the viewers that have been tuning in and the other people who are involved in this webinar series, so that people can start to support the work that both of you do and support the work that you find really important that needs more attention. And I also want to thank the Spirit Weavers Gathering and For the Wild as being the organizers of this event. And the next webinar will be with Heather Milton Lightning and Malia on direct action from the grassroots. So please tune in for that. And yes, thank you all so much. And also, if they'd like to contact both of you or your organizations, that's up on the website, and you can find them through there. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.